Well, welcome everybody. My name is Jonathan Gustin. I am the founder and lead teacher of Purpose Guides Institute, and I am delighted to have my friend and colleague Diego with me here today for an event we have titled Climate Change as a Catalyst for Purpose. So maybe I'll just hand it over to him for 1 minute to give a brief introduction, and then I'll kind of lay out what we're going to do. So Diego, great to have you on the call.
Thank you for having me, Jonathan, and thank you everyone for joining. And yes, I'm Diego Saez Gil. I am an entrepreneur working on the problem of climate change through a company called Pachama, which I will talk a little bit about. And I am very grateful for Jonathan, who helped me on my journey of crystallizing my purpose as I was searching on ways to contribute to this problem that was worrying me a lot. And since then, a couple of years ago, we have become friends with Jonathan. And in a hike is that we came out with the idea of doing this gathering and hopefully sharing a message that can be useful to others. So here we are. Thank you, Jonathan.
Great to have you here. Yeah, Diego took the Purpose Discovery program with me maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and then I lost track of him. And I was watching television one day, and it was a what was it? It was a climate change thing, and the main star was Microsoft, Bill Gates. And so I'm watching this with my wife, and there's Diego. He's on there, and I'm like, Kate, who's my wife. I'm like, look at this. Oh my God, I know this guy. Look what he's doing. It's amazing. And then the second vignette to share with you is I'm walking down my street in Fairfax, California, where I was living. And then there's Diego with his wife. And I'm like, hi. So he moved like 2 blocks from me. So we became friends and went on a hike. And we talked about the intersection between what I call soul level purpose. You can call it what you want, your intuition, so forth, and climate activism. Later, when I tell you a little bit about my story, I'll share that I started a group called Green Sangha, spiritually based environmental activism. But I want to start with a little kind of interview dialogue with Diego. And I guess the first thing is really if you can share just what Pachama is, so people can situate who you are and the work that you're doing, and then we'll get a little more backstory.
For sure. So Pachama is a technology company that I started together with a friend about 5 years ago. And the mission of the company is to help restore nature to solve climate change. As many of you guys know, we need to move away from fossil fuels and stop burning CO2, which is causing climate change. But we also need to sequester back CO2. And the best way that we have today is by protecting and restoring natural ecosystems. Today, the biggest carbon sinks in the planet are the rainforest. And unfortunately, we are destroying them at an unprecedented rate. So we started the company with a mission of helping reverse that. And we use technology, including satellite images, AI, cloud computing, and other new tools to measure, monitor, and report on the carbon sequestration that these natural ecosystems produce around the world, and then use that data to help finance projects that are doing reforestation and conservation around the world, and in doing so, helping companies and governments that want to take responsibility for their emissions to invest in projects that will sequester carbon back, rebalancing the carbon cycle of the planet. And of course, this is not just about carbon, it's about biodiversity, it's about water, it's about income for communities that will be affected by the consequences of climate change. And the company today is about 90 employees in 12 different countries. We work with forest projects in 15 different countries. and we work with some of the biggest corporations in the world that are investing in reforestation and conservation projects. We have raised $80 million from some of the best investors in the world, including Bill Gates and other climate tech-oriented investors in Silicon Valley. And of course, we still have a big mountain ahead of us, but I'm surprised by myself. I'm surprised myself by how big this idea is growing and the impact that it's having, and how following a purpose has led to the impact that we're already having in the world.
Fantastic. Oh my goodness. Big smile on my face. Could you give an example of a company? It might be Bill Gates's Microsoft or something else, an example of a country that you're working with, and specifically how you're doing that.
Yeah, so countries today are aiming to stop deforestation at the jurisdictional level by also tapping into carbon markets. So, for example, Brazil, the different states are measuring their deforestation risk and aiming to target efforts. And in that sense, satellite data and machine learning models are very useful for them. But our main focus is working with companies today and with individual projects. There's going to be a big potential to combine these two things: national level interventions and project level interventions.
And what's on the horizon for you? More of the same, doubling down, just getting better at that? As you look ahead in the next year, 2 or 3, what is your hope for Pachama, and how do you hope to achieve whatever goals you have?
Sure. I mean, we still need to do a lot to make it easier for landowners, indigenous communities, and any land steward around the world that can effectively intervene the land in the form of reforestation or conservation. We have to make it very easy for them to access these markets. Today is still very difficult. So we're building a lot of tools, software tools, but also processes and even financing tools to give access to carbon markets to communities around the world. We also need to keep making it a trustworthy market. As someone mentioned earlier, there are a lot of questions in carbon markets today because in the first generation of this market, there wasn't a lot of transparency. But today, with satellite data, with the internet, we can actually make it very transparent. And in doing so, show the impact of these projects and prevent bad players from taking advantage of these frameworks. So we're going to keep working on increasing the transparency and the trust for the funders of these projects. And then, of course, we need to keep being ahead on the technology. These technologies are advancing exponentially. AI, everybody has seen this year the progress of artificial intelligence, and satellites also. We have thousands of satellites orbiting the planet, and they're only going to get better in terms of sensors and cameras. So we're going to keep hiring brilliant engineers to work on combining these technologies and put them at the service of nature.
Perhaps most people on this call know about carbon credits and how it works, but this recording may go far afield. Could you just give us a carbon credit 101 in a couple of minutes so that we're all on the same page as we dive deeper?
Yeah, the idea is to give credits to those who are doing these additional interventions that will help sequester carbon and keep it on the ground. One of these type of interventions is reforestation. There are many others that you can do to remove carbon or avoid emissions. And by giving credit to them, we're actually giving value to this intangible that the economy didn't value before. In the other side, corporations are working hard to reduce their emissions, but there are many sectors or many parts of their emissions that are difficult to abate in the short term. So companies are invited to take responsibility for these difficult to abate emissions by buying carbon credits or investing in projects that generate carbon credits. in doing so, accelerating this carbon sequestration that is needed today to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement.
Mm.
And the idea, just to finalize, is that these carbon credits need to be verifiable. There needs to be a system that makes it very credible for companies to make a claim with these carbon credits. And it's an idea that has a lot of potential. It's a relatively new idea in the world economy. And there are many players like us who are bringing the best available technology to make these markets work with integrity at scale.
Mm. So, so I'm understanding through software, AI, and satellite data, we can actually verify, and the whole carbon credit market can become much more trustworthy. People can invest in it, have faith in it, and that it's really working. It's not some sort of, gimmick or.
Exactly. And if that happens, then we could be driving tens of billions of dollars to save the tropical rainforest of the planet and to reforest. We have 2 billion hectares in the planet available for reforestation, where we could be creating corridors for wildlife, reversing the loss of habitat and biodiversity, and in doing so, have a meaningful positive impact on climate and life on the planet.
I want to open it up in a minute just to see if anyone wants to dialogue with you about any of the things you've said. And then I'm going to come back and ask you some questions more of a spiritual nature. But my final question for the moment is going to be the timing. From what you know about the situation, tipping points and potential for runaway climate change and so forth, is there enough time to scale up to the kind of, threshold we need in order to make a meaningful difference?
Yeah, I believe there is. The scientists that put together the IPCC report for the United Nations talk about different scenarios, right? Different scenarios of carbon accumulation and global warming for the planet. There are some very scary scenarios if we don't act decidedly on phasing away fossil fuels and in protecting natural ecosystems. But there are scenarios in which, yes, we are going to have a level of warming. We are already have warmed the planet, but in a level that is still manageable by civilization, in which, yes, we will need to adapt systems, but we can avoid dramatic consequences. Of course, to achieve that scenario, we need decided investments in decarbonization, in renewable energy, in transforming every system of civilization, and critically on protecting and restoring nature. And, it's easy sometimes to see just the bad news, but there's a lot of good news in terms of investments and advancements in the technologies and in the policies that are needed to make those changes. And of course, the next 2 decades are the critical one. And that's why it's essential that we spread this message of the importance of working on the solutions, right? If we are paralyzed by the fear of climate change and we don't get to work on it, we're actually, contributing to the bad scenarios, right? But if we all work from wherever we are to acting in the face of this crisis, I think that we can achieve this positive scenario of keeping the planet under 1.5 degree warming and really building a regenerative, sustainable civilization for the second half of the century and beyond.
May it be so, my friend. And with your prodigious work and efforts, it could happen. Are there any questions? You know how to raise your digital hand, or it's such a small group, you could even just unmute. Anything you want to ask, Diego?
I have a question. You mentioned the forest-based approach. Do you have any plans to extend into ocean-based sequestration?
Yes, good question. Our team is starting to work on being able to measure and monitor mangrove ecosystems, which are coastal forest ecosystems that touch the oceans. And we're very excited about the potential of protecting and restoring mangroves. And then, of course, there is beyond the coastal ecosystems, ocean ecosystems that must be protected and restored. they're much more difficult to measure, such open systems, but they're critical. And yes, we would love to, at some point, be able to expand even beyond mangroves, because yes, oceans are a huge part of the equation when it comes to carbon and biodiversity.
Mm-hmm. And if you don't mind, a second question. What is your approach to ensuring the sustainability of your sustainability solutions with the approach you currently take? Maybe do you employ farmers or biologists who could advise and even ask a question better than I am right now about some of the things that are done with very high intensity crops that I hear sometimes are planted, for these credits that have a, short-term benefit, but a long-term negative impact on soil health?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the permanence or the durability of these projects is critical, and it's something that we care deeply for. And the sustainability, has two sides. One is, ecological. Yes, we need to ensure that these reforestations are done with native species, with a focus on biodiversity, combining a lot of different species, so that these ecosystems are resilient in the face of climate change and can continue to expand beyond one generation. The second part of permanence and sustainability is the economics. The communities that surround those ecosystems need to be involved, need to be benefited from them. So we care deeply about making sure that the communities are on board, that they are getting jobs and income from these projects, and that there's a fair share that they receive for a long period of time, so that these communities continue to stand for these projects for many, many decades ahead. And yes, we do employ scientists and people in the local areas where we do projects, both directly and indirectly, to make sure that the things are done right.
That's great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. And let's go to, great, Jennifer.
Okay. I wanted a great follow-up to Nicole's question on some of the hurdles that you had noted that landowners and stewards face hurdles in participating in the programs. And I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on some of those. Is it education about how to participate? Are there financial hurdles, or are there cost hurdles? What are some of those things that you're breaking down at the moment?
Yeah, all of the above. Education for sure. In South America, where I'm originally from, not many people know that you can actually make money from protecting and restoring a forest. And as a result of that, when people are when they own a forest, they would think of it as a source of income just by exploiting it. From a financial perspective, actually, it's a lot easier to get a bank loan or to get financing to deforest and do agriculture than to reforest or protect a standing forest, right? And that's what we're trying to change. We're trying to make it easier than it is to keep a forest alive than to kill it, right? Which is the opposite of what's the case today in South America and in all the developing countries that have big forest. So, and then, I think that, as I said, there's today is a very bureaucratic market that is also managed by the global north and is supposed to benefit the global south. So we're also trying to reduce that bureaucracy, make it very simple to participate in this market by taking the complexity out of it and just making it very easy for any type of landowner to participate.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. Now for another question, if someone wants to jump in. Otherwise, I'll
I have a question in the chat from Anurag. The question is, how is Pachama addressing the wildfires that are happening? Any insights on them for restoring the lost forests?
Yeah, so the projects that we work with take fire risk very seriously. and they enact plans to prevent or react very quickly in front of them. And to give you an example, I was recently in a project in Brazil in which the community has a WhatsApp group that actually is used to coordinate in front of any first signs of fire. And it's almost like a distributed system of reactivity to forest fires. And in the other side, we're very excited about the ability to measure and predict risk of fire using satellite data, historical data, and AI, right? This is a great use for AI. So it's something that our team is looking at, but also other teams are looking at, and we're looking to collaborate with these other teams that are using satellites and AI to prevent forest fires. There are certain practices of forest management that also can help reduce the risk of fire. And yes, we have to accept that, unfortunately, in a warmer planet, there's going to be more forest fires, but there are things that can be done to react quickly and to prevent the worst.
So, Diego, I was looking at your website today, and you use the word driven by purpose. It says Pachama's team is made up of a multidisciplinary and international group of engineers, scientists, operators from some of the best organizations in the world, including NASA, Google, and so forth. Our team is driven by purpose and a deep love for nature in our planet. So, what do you mean? A deep love? I guess I know what that means, but I'd like you to actually explicate that a little bit. And the word purpose is a little bit different from the word love. So perhaps you could do a longer answer by kind of bringing us back in time and to your own sort of spiritual sensitivity and reaching out. So I won't put words in your mouth, but I'll leave it there for a moment.
Yeah. Before I answer the question, yes, in which we are trying to use language that is not very common in Silicon Valley, but that really comes from the heart and from the journey that I have gone through. But yeah, let me go back to that journey, which is that. Well, first, I'm originally from the north of Argentina. I grew up surrounded by beautiful forest. My grandma, since I was a kid, told me about the importance of trees and made me, love nature since a very early age. But then I left Argentina right after finishing college. I first moved to Europe to do my master's, and then moved to the US, and in a way fell into the default journey that society tells us that we have to go on, which is a journey of having a career and growing professionally and making money and becoming successful in the face of society, right? So in that journey, I started two companies in the travel industry, which was another thing that I was very passionate about, traveling the world. But really, those companies were driven by yes, bringing products that people wanted, but personally, I was still driven by success and by achievement, and by the things that the majority of people in the West or in modern society are driven by. That led me to a moment in which I was living in New York City. My company was featured by the New York Times and by was receiving awards, and I was perceived as a successful young entrepreneur making it in America. But internally, I was very confused, to be honest, because I was feeling that I was not walking my true path. I was not very happy, to be honest, even though for an external observer, I was in the top of the world. And it was, in fact, in a trip to China where I got to see the pollution of the factories. In some cities in China, you don't get to see the next building for how much air pollution is there. And that was one of the first awakenings of like, what am I doing? I'm working so hard to become successful, but meanwhile, we're destroying the planet. And of course, I was starting to see the signs of climate change. That led me to step down from that company and decided to take a break and do some inner exploration. In that break, I actually went down back to South America, and with my brothers, we decided to do a trip to the Amazon rainforest. And we stayed in a village, in an indigenous village in the middle of the rainforest, in the limit between Peru and Brazil. And it was in that trip that I started to reconnect with another part of myself. The first is, the wisdom of the indigenous people of South America, which are my ancestors, and who had a way of knowing very different from that of the Western modern society. And I started tapping into that. And also in that trip, I got to reconnect with nature and to remember that I am part of nature. Like we forget, we think that nature is there and we're here, right? But we are a part of the web of life. And then I came back to New York City, and I had a couple of months of being very lost, walking in the streets of Manhattan without a job, confused about my path. I discovered Buddhism and decided to do a meditation retreat. And in that meditation retreat, I was 14 days in silence, learning to meditate, but also learning the Dharma of Buddhism, which was, also game-changing for me personally. I was coming from a very secular, hyper-rationalist way of seeing the world. And this was a moment of, really going deep into spirituality. But then, while I was, my trip to the Amazon had reconnected me to my roots and to the earth. And, this trip to do a meditation retreat connected me to the non-dual and to the, a transcendence beyond earth. What I was missing was like okay, what do I do with my life, right? These are wonderful wisdoms that I'm feeling really connected to, but what do I supposed to do? And there is actually where I discovered your work, Jonathan, the work of purpose, the work of integrating the spiritual and the deep, the nature, right, aspect of ourselves and how nature manifests through us into a plan of action for your life, right? And yes, I did the purpose discovery course with you, and it was essential to crystallize these ideas into into clarity of purpose for myself. And that clarity of purpose in which I investigated, what were my gifts, what were the things that I was naturally good at, what were the things that gave me joy, what were the messages that I wanted to convey to the rest of the world, and what was that Earth needed in this moment. And try to then turn that into a plan of action for my life. And that's how Pachama came to become an idea. And we started Pachama by writing a purpose statement and a mission statement and a vision statement and a value statement. So from day one, this company really is, a purpose-driven company. And, I like to say that we're a for-profit, but also a for-purpose company. And hopefully, that's always going to be the driver of this organization. And it's been incredible to see how the company also became a lighthouse for other people who were called by the same purpose. So, we actually had 20,000 people applying to work for Pachama, which I'm so humbled by. We only are able to hire 90 today, but it's amazing to see how many others were called by this purpose of protecting life on Earth, of restoring nature to solve climate change. And I hope that journey inspires others to find their purposes, which are going to be different than mine. But I think that this is a moment in which we do need to get to work on our purposes because the planet needs it. And as we said before, time is of the essence. The next 2 decades are critical for the future of humanity and life on the planet. So I'll stop there, but that's probably a segue into why the word purpose shows up in our website.
Wow. Yeah, I'm just digesting some of what you were sharing there. What, if any, impediments have you found? So you, to some degree, you found yourself really waking up to and being drawn and magnetized into certain work in the world. Are there any sort of counter forces that you've found either before or during?
I think we lost you for a second, Jonathan.
Oh,
or I at
okay.
least. Yeah, you were saying obstacles that I faced during the journey.
Yeah. So were there any obstacles or sort of counter forces,
Yeah.
before, while experiencing your soul level purpose, and afterward? What were some of the obstacles that you,
Yeah. So I guess before, one of the obstacles was that for a long time, I was asking myself, I had a lot of self-doubt. First, because I had no experience in climate work. I was not a scientist. I was not an expert on none of the topics that this company touches, other than building technology teams and raising venture capital. But I did have a kind of imposter syndrome, right? Of like, who am I to try to start a company with the purpose of helping solve climate change, right? But then I think that the answer was in the form of this famous quote, if not us, who, if not now, when, right? Or another indigenous quote that I like a lot, which is, we are the people that we've been waiting for, right? But there was a good deal of imposter syndrome that I had to overcome. There was also a question to myself of, is this my ego, right? Because before I had been ego-driven, right? So I was questioning, is it my ego trying to, again, hit some nails because I have a hammer in my hand, right? Or be on the spot, whatever, right? And so I had to really go deep and ask these questions to the soul or to the higher self, however we want to call this deeper voice that goes beyond, the chattery thinking in our mind, and try to confirm that the intention to start this company was coming from a very pure, deep purpose and not from ego. Now, when I started the company, yes, many obstacles and challenges until today. I think that the life of an entrepreneur and of actually any activist, any person who's trying to affect change in the world is full of obstacles. One particular one that is kind of epic on its form is that a few months after we started the company, there was a wildfire in California and my house burned down, the house from which we started the company. I had a cabin in the woods in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and that cabin was our garage. There we got together with my co-founder and our early team members. And from one day to another, the fires and climate change itself, that's the part that is kind of difficult to believe, but took our house. And it was a test to my determination because, I had to stand up again and rebuild my life from scratch, all while keep building this company. Other challenges that are common to any entrepreneur was rejection, right? I presented this idea to investors and to people, and what I often would get was like, oh, that's such a novel idea, but is this really a startup? Is this really a company? Shouldn't this be kind of like, something else? And I had to just continue believing in myself that this could be a company. And the reason I wanted to make it a company is because I thought that there could be a business model that allows this to be actually very big and very impactful, and that we could tap into investors from Silicon Valley, and we could tap into engineers from Silicon Valley. But I had to be able to overcome lots of rejections. And yeah, until today, you know, there is obstacles every day. But I think at some point, if you're driven by purpose, you realize that obstacles are the way, as Marcus Aurelius would put it, right? That the obstacles are there to strengthen you and to show you or are opportunities for you to demonstrate the determination you have for the purpose that you've been called for.
One question we got in the chat, someone said, I'm 25 and I've been following Pachama for a long while. What advice would you give a young person trying to get involved? Actually, I want to break that into two. If you're someone who's already working in tech or climate change or some other activist situation, would it behoove that person to do what you did, which is get in touch with their deeper soul level purpose? And or would you recommend that people actually take some time apart like you did? You said you kind of stopped for a while and actually had a fallow period of time where you really went inside. So maybe you could kind of address it in those two ways.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that it is important to take this moment of inner search, right? We come out of schooling into the world of work, right? And we never stop to really ask ourselves, what is our calling? What is our purpose? Indigenous communities actually, or indigenous people around the world had rites of initiation, right? In which you were actually sent out into nature to come back with your purpose, right? With your contribution to your community. We don't have that in modern society. So yes, I do recommend doing some inner work before launching yourself fully into your true work. But also, I think that you can also start right away, right? Getting involved and doing things and contributing in whatever way you find that you can contribute. But yeah, one of the things that I mentioned before is it's important to identify what are your gifts, what are the things that you're good at that then you can contribute with, right? And then my advice to a young person would be to get out there, reach out to people. That's another thing I did when I started the company. I started reaching out, just cold emailing scientists and people in the market and engineers, and people actually respond. Some won't, but you just shouldn't take it personally. But just some people will respond and will help you out, even with a mentoring session or introducing you to someone else. So yeah, I guess these are like an inner and outer response, I guess.
Yeah, beautiful. I want to open it up again in case anyone has another question. It could be on the science end of things, or it could be actually a little more on that personal end that, Diego was sharing about his path and his journey, bringing his activist bent together with purpose and climate change. So let's just see if anyone wants to jump in.
Yeah, I have another question for you. I have not taken quite the journey you have on soul searching, but I spent almost 2 years traveling the world, and along the way had many good opportunities to reflect. And in a particular breathwork session in Thailand, I was struggling with a lot of guilt about my day-to-day life and how it can conflict with my goals and values and what I want to do in sustainability. And what came to me in that moment was trying to find that balance between going back to nature the way it should be and accepting the fact that today the unnatural is natural in some form. It's clearly not natural because it's unnatural, but it almost seems unavoidable. So how do you balance that in what you do day to day at Pachama?
Yeah. So in one hand, there is the lifestyles that we live, right, which are sometimes contributing to this crisis. And what I attempt to do is I attempted to gradually get my lifestyle aligned with my values and my principles. It's impossible to do it from one day to another, but you can do it gradually. And we're never gonna be unimpactful, right? Every human activity has an impact on the environment, but we can try to minimize it and then to actually have a net positive impact through our lives. In terms of, I mean, we are a technology company, right? And technology sometimes is seen as opposite to nature, right? But I actually try to reframe that and think that technology can be at the service of nature, can be at the service of the planet. And same with economy and ecology, which seem to be opposite concepts. Actually, both come from the same Greek word, oikos, for eco, which meant the home. And economy was the financial management of the home. Ecology was the study of the natural home. And I think that the task of humanity is to realign economy and ecology, technology and ecology, to create the balance that the biosphere needs to, ensure the sustainability of humanity and life on Earth. So I think that, yeah, I mean, guilt can be paralyzing, but it's also, a signal that we are in disalignment maybe between our actions and our values. We all feel it, and I think that it's important to have self-compassion and then move into action to align our lives to our values.
Thank you. It's a very, very beautiful answer. Very helpful.
Thank you.
Me just extending from that, so I've been doing these climate changes, spiritual teacher events with different non-dual teachers, Adyashanti and so forth. And so when I get ready for these events, I spend a lot of time buried in the climate change news. And sometimes I feel like I'm just a puddle on the ground. And so you spend even more time than I do. So one question is, how do you get yourself out of those, holes? If, first of all, do you fall in them? And if you do, how do you then lift yourself up? Because the news is, I feel, sometimes just saturated in my very being with some very scary scenarios. So there's a fear and anxiety, as well as just a very deep sadness. How do you meet that?
Yeah. What comes to mind is what Uruguayan writer Eduardo Galeano said one time when he was asked if he was optimistic or pessimistic, and he said, depending on the hour of the day. Sometimes in the morning I'm optimistic, in the afternoon I'm pessimistic, and in the night I'm optimistic again. And that's how I feel. Clearly, there are reasons to be worried. And clearly there is pain already here. There are millions of people who are already affected by the consequences of climate change. We are seeing the wildfires, the floods, the different sufferings that climate change is already producing in millions of people. So there are reasons to be sad. There are reasons to be worried, but there are also reasons to be hopeful. And there is a saying that a tree falling makes more noise than a forest growing. And I truly believe on that, right? It's the news, especially in this moment of media, is so much focused on whatever, generates more clicks. So bad news are going to be reported much more than good news, but the good news are out there. News about efforts to stop deforestation and start reforestation. News about the incredible rise of solar energy, news about the adoption of electric cars, news about breakthroughs on batteries, news about cities at the city level. Sometimes at the country level, it seems that there is inaction, but at the city level or at the state level, there are great progress on transforming the infrastructure in the favor of climate change. So I guess to answer your question, I try to not turn my eyes away from the bad news, accept the feelings that come with the bad news, but also try to be, proactive on seeking good news. And then more importantly, trying to make good news by working on positive things.
Yeah, who is it who said if you don't like the news, go out there and make some?
Exactly.
Yeah, anyway, whoever said it, thank you. That's pretty good. All right. This would be a good time to kind of switch gears for a moment.
Yes.
Just give everyone a breather and just take a few breaths, because the topic is challenging, to be sure. Yeah, I really appreciate you, Diego. You're very articulate, very heartfelt, but what is particularly astonishing to me is your willingness to really hear the call and then move. For example, you're cold calling 100, 200, 300 people. That's courage, and I think courage is going to be part of what we're going to discuss. It's one thing to know one's purpose, it's another thing to inhabit it, to integrate it, to embody it and give it away, and that does take courage. So I like that your story embodies these different aspects of purpose: discovery, integration, embodiment. Yeah. Well, I can sort of riff on purpose for a bit, or if you want to direct a few questions my way, Diego, we can go either way.
Yes, I mean, one of the reasons I was excited about this gathering and sharing this recording to the public afterwards is to let the world know about your work and the work of the people that you train as well, the purpose guides. Because the journey of purpose discovery and enacting is not an easy one, and the work that you guys do is incredibly important. So yes, I would love to hear from you, your story, and then we can dig into what is purpose work. But love to hear your story, and I'm sure that the audience will too.
Before I tell my story, I'll just say one thing on the subject of purpose. You spoke to something that I think a lot of people experience, that it's my contention that human beings are, we're narrative creatures, we're storytellers, and we tell some kind of story about our lives to just help make sense of it. And there's 1,000 different stories. And often what seems to happen is we inherit or absorb from, hold on a second, a little water. We inherit or absorb from our culture, from our families, the purposes that they feel should be in the foreground of awareness. And if we're lucky, if we're in a healthy society, if we're in a very healthy family, great, you won the lottery. But for many people, as you said, the default purpose is to be successful, which is, of course, not a terrible thing, but it is a far cry from what a human being can actually embody and become. So I think purpose is it's indigenous to humans, and it's something that there are different layers as we burrow down into our depths, and they can complement each other. I still want to enjoy, my wife and my kid, and I love listening to live jazz, and I like, whatever it may be, going on hikes and going camping and so forth, but though that's not my soul level purpose. My soul level, I wasn't put on the planet to listen to jazz. It brings me alive, it brings me joy. That's great. But if I'm looking for something deeper, then that's where I look to soul. So, my story is that I, from a very young age, was pretty much obsessed with spirituality. It's just, everyone has their weirdness, and mine was, from a kid onward, whatever this word enlightenment meant, was very important to me. So if I heard a story about the Buddha, classical sage, I'd be like, whatever that is, I want that. And I was attracted to wisdom. And I remember being 12 and being in junior high, and I was already like, okay, I need a mentor. I need someone to steer me. And the most wise person I knew, at least I thought, was Mr. Wenger, who was the vice principal of my junior high school. And I was like, what's your spiritual, journey? What's your spiritual practice? And he just was actually playing around with me. He goes, "Oh, I'm a sun worshiper." And I'm like, "A sun worshiper? Or you worship what, the Egyptian, sun god Ra?" And he wouldn't really answer. And only later did I realize, he doesn't want to get fired for telling me whatever his real situation was. And so at that high school, I remember a moment where I guess I'd gone on a bathroom break. I was facing the lockers, a row of lockers in the junior high school. So I'm about 12 or 13. And I just stopped dead and I fell into an inquiry, a reverie. And it was, what do I do in this lifetime? It was a really powerful, deep question. And the parts of an answer that came then were, and this is my 12-year-old language, so you'll have to somewhat forgive it, and maybe a little grandiose as well. It was like, well, if I'm going to do something, so the first answer was be part of saving the world. That was number one. That I wasn't 100% sure what that meant, but that was the first answer. The second was, I have no idea how to do that. So being enlightened would be really helpful, being wise. And so there was this desire, what is the ultimate truth and how can I be an instrument of it in a way that serves life? And so I discovered that there were really sort of two main inquiries, at least for me, that really were important. So the first one is, who am I, or what am I at essence? If I'm going to be effective, I am, and who I am in my innermost. The second question, and to me that wasn't enough. It wasn't about being in a mountain cave and waking up to unbounded awareness or enlightenment or awakening realization. It was also this second question, what do I do? And I don't mean just, eating and playing and having so. I meant, like, is there something that I'm spiritually called to? So what do I do with this one wild, precious life, as the poet Mary Oliver put it? So I held on to those questions. I thought, well, lucky me, I've got two good questions. And then went, years and years and years of frustration because, was I enlightened? No. Did I discover what my soul level purpose was, immediately? No. So flash forward, I'm 20 years old, taking some time off of college. And I'm doing a private Zen retreat. I was a Zen student in a little cabin in Northern Ontario, Canada. And between, Zazen, between meditation periods, I'm lying on the couch in this cabin and I'm 20. So I'm feeling into, this question, what am I going to do? I'm going to graduate college in a year or something. What do I do? And it wasn't just the question of how do I earn a living, which was also on the table, but this inquiry was deeper than that. And I had what I would regard or call a vision. And it came as a picture and as words. And I didn't know where it came from. And I was just doing, classical Buddhist meditation. And then boom, I hear the words, whole person midwifery. And I'd never heard that particular sentence before. And then I saw this image, it's hard to describe mystical experiences, but I saw a table, the kind of table a massage therapist would use, a person lying on it and me standing next to them. And all at once, in an intuitive flash, I was like, wow, that's my name. You know, Jonathan was the name my parents gave me, but I am to do whole person midwifery. And I knew it had nothing to do with catching babies. It wasn't, the word midwife wasn't indicating that. It was that I was supposed to be an accompaniment, a co-explorer with the people that I was destined to work with, to help them experience more and more of their wholeness. Well, then became the period of apprenticeship, because it took years and decades to become even a little bit adequate to being whole person midwife. So then I, you know, studied some different things. I became a licensed therapist. I became a purpose guide, started my own school, became a meditation teacher, so that I would be more adequate to this task. So that's a little of the story, and perhaps I'll bring it in for landing here, at least for the moment. There have been a number of different delivery vehicles, as I like to call them, for being a whole person midwife. So here's a couple. So being a psychotherapist would be one, but being an activist is another. So in the year 2000, I started Green Sangha. Sangha just means spiritual community. And it's a spiritually engaged environmental activist organization. And what I wanted to do was get people who were sitting on the meditation cushion like me and get them involved in activism. And then on the other side, the activists who can sometimes have a tendency to burn out, get frustrated, anxious, and angry, and so forth, they might benefit from a meditation practice. Being able to touch on equanimity in a way that would make them there for the long game. So that's an example. And why I use the word delivery vehicle is that it, to me, a person's vocation or career isn't the same as their purpose. So, you know, there are 1,000 or 10,000 kindergarten teachers, and you have to be called to that, or those little kids will chew you up and spit you out. But if you talk to them, you'll see that each one of them has like a different sort of soul print. There's something that they're there for, to steward in their students. The same thing with the psychotherapy, for instance. You know, if you know anything about Freud and Jung, you can see clearly they had the same job, the same title, and yet the flavor, what their healing modalities were very different. And so I think one can make a case that one's delivery vehicle is a part of, but not the core of one's soul's purpose. So am I a climate activist? Yes. Am I a therapist? Yes. Am I a da 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 da? But at the center of it is this feeling, this knowing that the unique transformational process that I'm here to do again and again in a variety of different ways is midwifing the wholeness of a human being. So that's a distinction I think is pretty essential.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing, Jonathan. And with that, I am curious to hear more about purpose discovery work and some of the core concepts that you use to help people discover their purpose. And then maybe we can open for questions from the audience. But can you share more about what is the purpose work?
Yeah. Well, a person can take or leave the cosmology, the kind of the story that holds it, but I think it's important for me to just, you know, mention a couple of its features. A person can be an atheist, a Christian, an agnostic, and so forth. It's fine by me. But I think the question of identity, you know, what is life? What is a human being? What am I really? Helps us orient. Otherwise, if we don't have like a cosmology of depth, then we're relying on our egos, our intellects, which are great for building bridges and AI and satellites and so forth, but not necessarily great for some of the other questions. And so it's been my experience through meditation and vision quests and all sorts of different spiritual methodologies that, and this is going to sound a little far out to some people, and that's okay, is that our deeper identity is spiritual in nature. And you can use that word as, you know, broadly as you want. I'm not selling religion here, but definitely spirituality. And that secreted within each person is soul. And in fact, as you go even more deeply into it, it can appear that instead of soul being in us, the, you know, skin encapsulated ego, that we are actually inside of soul. And when I lean into that notion, the kind of perfume of that, I discovered that the Jonathan character is much more relaxed because he's being used by a purpose beyond self, beyond its own. My ego knows what it likes. It likes chocolate, it likes wine, it likes good food, loves sugar and playing video games, whatever. But in terms of like, what do I do? There's sometimes it's called a still small voice, and it's a dimension of us that is connected with destiny. So another word I like to use is the word providence. And normally providence is associated with like you could call it a deity figure, something at an infinite distance, and it directs our life. And if that's the way you conceive of it, that's perfectly fine. I think of it as a little different because I don't experience a deity figure at remote distance. It's more like providence is when I'm listening with subtle ears to something, and it feels like it's coming from inside, and it's pulling me. It's like I'm providence or destiny, you know, let me leave Canada when I was 18, and now I'm 56, and I'm back. And none of that was in the plan. I didn't sit down and go, I will do this, and then I will do that. So I would invite people who, you know, bother to listen to this, to consider the possibility that destiny is an actual thing, that we come to love life in a very specific way. The way you love life is beautiful and unique to you, and the way I love life is beautiful and unique to me. And the same with every person listening to these words. But then the question becomes, how? How am I to be a demonstration of love, a force of loving power in the world? So this concept of soul encounter, where we have a moment, an experience where we encounter our destiny through, and it can be many ways, an image. Carl Jung, the famous, you know, Swiss psychiatrist, said that each person has a unique myth, and when we key into that, our lives goes much better and become much more powerful agents of cultural transformation. So if we actually have a vision, if you will, or a revelation of the image at the center of our being, then that can inform and guide our decisions, the projects we choose, the people we meet, the friends we meet, how we spend our time. Otherwise, by default, you know, we'll be going pleasure, 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 and there's nothing wrong with pleasure at all. And, you know, is there a purpose beyond my own pleasure? So soul encounter through varying spiritual practices is something that anybody can experience, because it's not at infinite distance. It's right there inside of you. And the very desire or longing to know your purpose is coming from that place itself.
That is beautiful. And maybe similar to your invitation to the audience before, we can invite if anybody has a question for you right now. And if not, I have more questions.
I scared everybody away.
um,
I actually have a question,
there you
sorry.
go, Clea.
Please.
Thanks. Yeah, so I introduced myself as saying that the powerlessness and despair that I feel around climate change, I'm not sure how to integrate that in terms of my own purpose. It hasn't been a focus of my teaching. And for some reason, it doesn't feel like that is my purpose. So I'm wondering if you have any inquiries or other ways that could help me get in touch with, okay, I'm feeling a lot in this area, and like I can do the grief work, absolutely, around it, but then to actually leverage that into something that can be of more benefit. Does that question make sense?
Yeah, yeah. Perhaps the way to answer that would be to do I could do a little guided meditation.
Great.
Before that, I'll just say that, I think it depends on who shows up for the information that I take in. When it's Jonathan, little ego, he gets overwhelmed because, my God, it's more than I can possibly hold. As an individual person, my response often, not always, to the news is overwhelm, anxiety, anger, depression. It's too much. However, if I'm coming from true self or deeper self or soul self, then it's very different. Then it's just the question of like, well, what's my role? What's the moment? What are the times calling from me? So, I don't know if this is apples to apples, but since I'm in it, I'll try it. So I have a 14-year-old, and I find fathering a 14-year-old to be just sometimes incredibly frustrating and difficult. If I'm trying to like figure out how best to grow a human being into like an adult or whatever, I'm just like, I would need to read way more books and practice for 1,000 years. But sometimes it's just like, okay, wait a minute. What's the role? What's the moment calling from father? And there's no guarantee of the way things will happen. Every time a parent raises a child, you don't know. And there's an intimacy in not knowing. And you're listening, like, what is this moment asking? Sometimes it's being more stern and strict. Other times it's being just more permissive. Other times it's da 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 da. So I think one kind of response to your question is ask yourself, from which identity am I relating to this friend or this news or this fire or this disaster or my partner or my child and so forth. And if it's not from your deepest part, you may want to take a little adventure in that direction. So maybe let's do that a little bit. I'm going to use a fancy Greek term, entelechy, and so let me just introduce you to it. So Aristotle, about 300 BC, came up with this word, entelechy, and it means a thing's full fruition, a thing's full blossoming. And so he said the entelechy of an acorn is an oak tree. The entelechy of an acorn is an oak tree, and everything has an entelechy. My son has an entelechy, but no one gave me the blueprint. I don't know what his destiny is, and he's 14, so I'm not sure he knows yet either. Although I've been asking a few questions, and so before I lead you in this little entelechy exercise, consider this possibility. So I want to make sure I get your permission and buy-in at the level of intellect, that maybe, just possibly, you were meant to grow into yourself in a very specific way. Not a maple, not a spruce, not an alder, not a redwood, but an oak. the oak that you were meant to be? And what if you had, all the time in the world and great luck and fortune and good mentoring and all the rest, and that you were able to actually make that journey? So that's the request I would make of each of our intellects, to open to the possibility. The destiny is a real thing, and telechy exists. And in a sense, it's like a blueprint, like the acorn has sort of secreted within it its entire life cycle. It's all there, and yet it has to grow into that. So if you'd like to join me, you can close your eyes if you wish. Maybe take a deep breath or two, if that would help you. There's a whole sort of 40-minute version of this, but I'm going to give you a little 10-minute taste. So in a way that you see fit, make a little prayer or a request to life that you be able to commune with, or able to sit with your very own entelechy. I'll take you on a little guided meditation. What if the acorn of you could have an audience with the oak tree of yourself? The wisest, most mature, most enlightened, most soul purpose realized version of you. So imagine a field, or some place in wild nature that humans haven't yet touched. And through the power of imagination, just look around the sky, the ground, noticing any plants and trees, just noticing the topography. Let the scene come to you. You don't have to imagine a certain thing, although you can if you'd like. Perhaps there are animals, insects, birds. And know in your bones that you are part of this landscape. You're not merely walking on it, or sitting or standing, but you are a feature of the earth itself, of this scene. You are an emanation or a modulation of the earth, so-called born in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, or 90s. And eventually you'll be composted. Feeling this intimate, tender connection with all of life. Now, coming back to this prayer, or this invitation for entelechy to move towards you any way it sees fit. It could appear as just a presence, or as an oak tree, or it may be you, but a little older. Whether it's a tree or you in the future or just a presence. Entelechy radiates a depth and a wisdom that is simultaneously beyond where you are now, but intimately familiar, because it's not so far away in reality. Just taking another half minute just to be with this presence. If it's only faint, that's okay. If it's still just an idea of entelechy, that's all right. But as vividly as this short meditation can allow the entelechy of you to show up at full strength, to visit and commune with you. We'll move now into 2 sharings with entelechy, and then the meditation will end. The first is a kind of confession, or a kind of a sharing. Your heart. How are you affected by the news and or the experience and the future challenges of climate change and a myriad other crises that we face? This is you're speaking to, a more mature version, so it'll know if you're telling the truth. You can just be nakedly honest. You could be optimistic in this moment or pessimistic, just wherever you are now. Allow yourself to be completely received by this older, wiser version of you. You don't even have to speak in words. You could just share sort of telepathically. This is where I'm at. Now asking the future self, the entelechy of you, this second and final question. What is my next step? My next love-saturated response to the times? There are 100 or 1,000 or 1,000,000 things I could do. But entelechy, what is mine to do next? Ask this any way you like. But know this. One, it may not answer in words, although it could. Sometimes when soul or entelechy speaks, it speaks in images or symbols, poetry, energetic shifts. Be open to language beyond words. And two, the response may come right away, or in a minute, an hour, or a day or more. You can make a special request to entelechy to respond to you immediately, but I've noticed that sometimes soul has its own timing. So just take a couple of minutes to make your petition, your request for an image or a symbol or a knowing, the next piece of your destiny. And then just be open and see what appears on the screen of the mind, knowing that it may well be an image coming from soul, from entelechy. If you get a response, perhaps an image, let's say, I would caution you against trying to interpret it or understand it right away. Rather, live with the image or communication. Just sort of being with it, rather than a rush to make sense. And if you do rush, that's fine too. There's no guarantee, but a revelation is possible when you ask a sincere, heartfelt question about your destiny. Just taking one more minute to be in the company, the presence of the depths of you, calling it soul or entelechy if you wish. As we end this meditation, I invite you to make a little inward bow to entelechy. Perhaps, if it's authentic to you, to let it know that you'd like to spend more time in its presence, of a closer relationship. You and the destiny of you. Final look around at the surroundings. Acknowledgement, appreciation. And then when you're ready, you can open your eyes or let them stay closed for as long as you'd like. I might say a couple of things, and then I'd love if a few of you, well, if all of you, but if a few of you would share what you experienced. I think ego thinks there's a lot of choices, and soul thinks there's one. I think one thing that we find, and Diego pointed towards this, is our talents or our soul core powers, our innate genius, is itself a pointer, a soul print hint of our destiny. Had I been a talented jazz drummer or a talented downhill ski racer, I think I might have pursued those because I enjoyed those very much when I was young. And but no, that wasn't to be. And so I think recognizing, what you're good at. You have talents, you have abilities. So that's part of it. Part of it. Another part is what, really brings you alive, what brings you joy, and what the world needs. And so there's this quote I use all the time. Frederick Buechner, a theologian, said, "Find the place where your deepest gladness and the world's deep hunger meets." And you could say that's the X and Y axis of destiny. It's not just about what brings you alive. Otherwise, I'd be drumming, maybe. It's not just about what the world needs. I often use my sister as an example, a really good, successful palliative care doctor, but no, that's far too much blood and guts for me personally. So it's really this question, well, wait a minute. What really brings me this deep joy and aliveness, and the world is calling. So this is where the calling of the times, your soul core abilities and powers, and then what I'm calling providence or destiny, listening for where that X and Y axis intersect. So any questions, or even better yet, anyone care to share, and it's okay if nothing happened too, your experience doing the short guided meditation. Normally it's much longer so that people can sink into it, but anyone care to share?
I can go ahead.
Please.
Thank you so much. So yeah, as I connected with that wise knowing, I was like, oh yeah, do the work you do, whatever. What I'm already doing doesn't need to change. I'm very good at that. It kept pointing me back to how I've used nature, not just because that is what I am and I'm part of, but as a stand-in for human relationships. And so I actually need to focus on my own healing work and having more community with humans. And that starts with being with the deep disappointment and loneliness that was my formative years. And I had the strongest aching sensation at the back of my heart, like really intense and very uncomfortable as I was feeling into that. So that's where I got to. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Beautiful. You know, we can ask a direct question about our destiny, and it says, attend to your human relationships, attend to your healing on a physical or an emotional level. Take some time off from work, like in Diego's case, and have a fallow period. We listen, you know, we take direction from true intuition. And, you know, it's one step and we do that. And then the next step is revealed and the next step is revealed.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Anybody else want to share?
I think Judy's sharing, but is muted.
Oh, okay. You're still muted, Judy. Let's see. How do we unmute you?
There. How's that?
Excellent.
Okay. Thank you. That was really beautiful. I consider myself a deep spiritual. Well, we are all deeply spiritual, but I very much connect to my spirituality and also have that theme of loneliness connecting to much of humanity that I consider to be mostly unconscious. And it's something that it's like a daily practice, almost 24/7. And I've called it the Jesus channel for me since I was a little girl, because it's just always there, part of me, and separates from a lot of people who don't seem to have that kind of awareness. So I'm so glad to connect with all of you who seemingly are conscious. And I'm very connected to nature. Nature is where I meditate. I walk and meditate. I've never been able to do the quote classic meditation. I've tried a million times, and I meditate deeply and silently in nature. And it's the happiest places. And just now, my vision of my oak tree became a flock of hummingbirds, and hummingbirds are one of my spirit animals. So I just wanted to share that because it was just beautiful and happy, and I've never actually seen a flock of hummingbirds. So they came, and I felt them coming with me, on this journey. So I just wanted to share that. And thank you. So much gratitude to you and Diego for this session today. I'm deeply appreciative. Thank you.
Most welcome. So I'm so glad you shared that image. So it's not just about receiving the image, it's again living with it. So I want to just make a next sort of suggestion, which is draw it, dance it, become it, talk to it, be it, and talk to you. It's like you're working, the images. It's one thing to have some kind of revelation or an image or a thought about one's destiny. And then it's like kind of having a relationship with it and letting it unfold. So, it's as strange as it sounds, have a relationship with a flock of hummingbirds and see what happens. Be in not knowing. Who knows what will unfold? And the worst that happens is you waste your time, and it tends not to be something good. But my guess is, like that's pretty you. It's highly unlikely anyone else had a flock of hummingbirds today. So follow it. Yeah, I think of these images as like a perfume or a scent that we follow, and we keep, oh wait, left, right, and it takes us. Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that image. Any other shares or questions, including you, Diego, if you want to share or anything?
I'll share.
Great.
Sorry, came back on video. I had turned it off because I'm multitasking for a trip that I have to leave for tomorrow. So apologies, but I was actually happy I had my camera off when I sat back down to participate in the meditation, because at one point when you talked about becoming or, recognizing ourselves as a part of the nature we were envisioning, I was just like streaming tears, because I was envisioning this the same thing I always envision when I think of a part of the world untouched by man, which is, Antarctic glaciers and, just mountains of ice. And to think like, oh, I could be something, that beautiful and strong and commanding it's very nice, because as I mentioned earlier, sometimes I feel that separation between me and nature and the guilt. And I think it's important to be a part of it. And when we got to the latter part about understanding, well, what do we do next? How do we feel right now? I have full confirmation that everything that I should be doing, I am already doing. I'm in a very transformative chapter of my life. And, just as I mentioned, I've been talking about making these changes for a few years now, but actually doing them now. It was a very nice feeling to understand that, I already know what I need to do. And that has been a big theme in my life. Also in the breathwork session I mentioned earlier, I took away something very strong from the practitioner in which she said, life is about remembering what we already know. And I think we all probably already know what we should be doing, and paying attention to it, seeking after it, asking why, understanding it is a very good feeling. So even this webinar today, I forgot that I signed up for. So thank you for the reminder email. And that reminder email came in as I was posting all of my thoughts on an Instagram story rant about balance and sustainability. The timing could not have been more ironic or better. So, it's all coming together. It's nice to have those moments in life that, not every moment can be like that, but thank you for the meditation.
Yeah, most welcome. Beautiful sharing. It is not just the realization or revelation, of your true nature and destiny, but the courage to embody it, like to know it, to know that you know it, and sometimes it takes a lot of work, and sometimes we don't get to perfection, I know, theoretically how to be a good husband, but 24/7 for the last 26 years, no, I wouldn't say so. And so it's like again and again recommitting, to in the most thorough, way possible. So yeah, I mean, that's why I said earlier with Diego, it's like one of the many things I appreciate about you, Diego, is your ability to know your purpose and then to do it with all the obstacles and all the difficulties. And setbacks are inevitable, you know, the sooner we get a calling, and then we feel pushed back, and that's just part of the dance, isn't it? So good for you. I'm really glad to hear you aflame with your purpose.
Thank you.
We have just a few more minutes left. Any specific questions about discovery or embodiment or anything else you want to discuss?
We had a question in the chat. Is our destiny predetermined?
Well, I'll offer my opinion. Yes. I think an acorn is not merely predisposed to be an oak, but it's destined to. One of the analogies I use is it wasn't, you know, when I was young, I didn't sit there and go, well, shall I choose, you know, being gay, straight, or bi? Because if I had done that, I would have chosen bi. Why would I leave anybody out? What it was instead was a response inside. I was like, what is natural and authentic to this one? And so in grade 5, I still remember her name, Debbie. And I was like, yep, okay, it's straight for me. That was a revelation. It wasn't a choice about, you know, what sexual attraction would be in the foreground. So, and I think it is like that for a lot of things. Now, how we live that, there's a partnership between everyday personality and ego, you know, and soul. And so I love this notion that we actually do have some say, but in terms of full-on destiny, you know, I'm not going to be Yo-Yo Ma, though I would like to be. I'm not going to be whatever it is that I think, you know. When I was 16, I saw the movie Gandhi. It came out on the big screen, and I instantly got a very strong case of why aren't I Gandhi syndrome. And I was like, I want to be like that. That's who I want to be. Just like that. And then, you know, after I don't know how many weeks, months, or years, and it was like, oh, that's not going to happen. He had a specific, you know. So yeah, no, I think destiny is a real thing. And it sounds to the ego like maybe disappointing, like, oh, you mean I can't do everything? You know, I actually find it an amazing relief to allow, to just water myself, if you will, right? To see what am I going to grow into. And this is also how I'm choosing to parent. I mean, I do, you know, try to form him to some degree, you know, but mostly I'm like, okay, who is this soul entrusted to me? What's his destiny? What's his personality? What's his calling? What are his unique, you know, signature strengths and talents? Like, how can I be in his corner to become his best self without me imposing what I think the best self would be? That isn't to say I never impose, because you know, I'm like, a few rules can be helpful. But mostly I'm like, this guy is so different than me. It's just, he's his own thing. So I'm like, okay, how can I support and be wind in his sails? And how can you be wind in your own sails? And how can you be wind in the sails of the people that you're working with, that are your bosses, that are your colleagues, that are your employees, and so forth, to really help them fulfill their destiny? So that's my 2 cents. We've got 5 minutes left. So Diego, come back. Here you are. Anything you want to share or impart as we come in for a landing today? And feel free to disagree with anything I say too. It's not, you know, religion. So I like, you know, to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, just gratitude. One thing that came to my mind when you said an acorn is destined to be an oak. but then the oak can take different shapes, right? Like if you look at two oaks, one is tilted to one side and one is like bigger or smaller, right? But so I like to think of that image that then you will adapt to the times that you are in. And these are times in which, you know, we have this particular situation of climate change and an environmental crisis. 100 years ago, it was a different environment. In 100 years, there's going to be a different environment. So we have to adapt to this moment of history in which we were born. And the oaks will take their own shapes if we listen to that. And thank you for reminding me of the concept of entelechy. I loved it when you first taught me many years ago, but it's such a powerful concept. I was thinking of what is the entelechy of Pachama as well, because organizations also have their own potential. But yeah, just enormous gratitude to you, and hopefully we can share this message to others on the recording, and each person here can also multiply the message.
I love what you said about the oak tree, because it's not an oak tree from 1,000 or 10,000 years ago. It's not an oak tree 1,000 or 10,000 years in the future. If this one, just pretty much exactly like this, was 10,000 in the past or in the future, the times would be different, and it would call something different out of us. And it's that response. You know, when I think of Gandhi, who was a lawyer, he was called by the Times, you know, to free India from, you know, British rule. When I think of Martin Luther King Jr., who was a minister called by the Times into civil rights, or Harriet Tubman, an escaped slave, and then had a, you know, what's that, an old age home that she ran in her backyard, called to make, you know, 13, 14 or more runs down in the Underground Railway. How the times are calling us not to do everything. And so I love that. How is the oak? What is it reaching out here, there? It doesn't have enough branches to reach out to everything, and to see what's that main branch that it's reaching out to. It's a great iteration. Yeah, thank you. All right, well, I think we're at time. So thank you for your attention, and I really enjoyed being here. I will just say I will send a follow-up email to the folks on this list. Once a year, we start this purpose discovery program that Diego was involved in a few years ago, and that will be starting in first week of September. And there are other events that Purpose Guides Institute does, but you're warmly welcome to join. Anything you want to plug or suggest, or your website, or something you want to invite people to, Diego?
No, just check out the Purpose Guide Institute website, the Pachama website, and you know, we're all accessible if anybody has follow-up questions.
So much fun. This is our first time to do something together, Diego and I, so I hope we do something again together.
Indeed. Thank you,
All
everyone.
right, folks. You step into the rest of your day with great attention to what you're called to.
Thank you so much.
Most welcome.